Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast podcast. I'm your host, Nate, along with my co-host, Matt.
Hey.
And today we're joined by Jari Cornelis. Jerry, welcome
Hi.
to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Jerry, mind telling us a little bit about yourself, like how you got into reptiles and kind of what you're currently doing?
Well, I mean, it all started when I was really young. I just always really had an interest in animals, and I grew up traveling. So when I was only 6 weeks old, I moved to Africa, and then as I was growing up, my dad would take me into the garden to catch frogs and geckos and things like that, and then that just progressed. And as I grew older, I just became more interested into the reptile side of things. Kept a few snakes here and there as I was growing up, and then but as far as like going to look for reptiles like herping and stuff, I didn't really, in my free time at home, I didn't really have that much opportunity for that. But when we would go on holidays, we'd always visit like national parks or just beautiful natural areas and stuff. And then when I actually moved to Australia, I met the right people, and at uni we would just go herping, and that's when it clicked for me, and I just haven't really stopped since then.
Yeah. So, you're currently doing graduate research with tiger snakes, correct?
Yeah, so I needed to do a master's project, and I was asking around some of my friends that have done PhDs and stuff about what unis to go to, and they said there was some cool stuff going on in Perth. So I reached out to my supervisor, and I just asked, hey, I want to do a master's on reptiles. I see you guys are doing some venomous snake stuff or monitor stuff. Is there a project for me in there somewhere? And he basically replied instantly saying yes. And then um, there was a few months of discussion about what I was going to do, and eventually Damien, who is kind of my unofficial supervisor, he's a PhD student. He's just finishing up now. We kind of carved up some of the things he couldn't squeeze into his PhD, and that's what I did. So I looked at a whole bunch of habitat quality stuff because within Perth itself, there are a few wetlands that are surrounded by urbanization or like on a gradient of urbanization. And within the urban wetlands, they kind of just live in a invasive vegetation. So I was just comparing some of the ecological variables of the vegetation itself and how tiger snakes live with that, and some of the factors like frog availability for them, because that's their preferred source of food in wetland areas. And then also I managed to put some transmitters in them and radio track them. And while doing that, we also put little temperature data loggers in them as well. So I also looked at their physiology and how effectively they thermoregulate. So I did quite a broad thesis on them, but worked out pretty good.
So, most Americans, we kind of have a filtered view of Australian environment, where it's kind of like mostly just empty desert outback setting. So, but you obviously described something down in Perth that's a little bit different. So, you want to go into a little bit of detail about the type of environment that you find tiger snakes in around there, and what? Well,
Yeah. So the whole idea of the dry, empty space sort of thing. There is a large portion of Australia that is that, but it's it's really biodiverse there as well. But along the coastal regions of, so it's just like a fringe along the edge, there's a lot of green areas, especially in the southwest of Western Australia, where I am now. There's a it's quite there used to be a lot of wetlands, but a lot of them have been destroyed from urbanization. So I live on the Swan coastal plain, and there's just a few pockets of remnant wetlands, and some of them are still in pretty good condition. And that's, at least in this area, that's where you find most tiger snakes. They do kind of, disperse through the coastal heath and maybe up in the hills a little bit, but the really concentrated populations are in the wetlands.
So tiger snakes as a whole tend to be a wetland species then?
They're actually super widespread across the southern and eastern coast of Australia. And, when on the mainland populations, at least, they definitely seem to prefer wetland habitats. But they're also found on like these pretty desolate islands, and it's just a completely different environment for them. For example, here they mainly eat frogs, but on this island just off the coast of Perth, there's no permanent water there, so there's no frogs. It's just rock and sand and like small shrubs, really. So they only have a small window over the year to feed on nesting birds, and then like the rest of the year, they mainly just have to go down the cracks in the rocks and wait it out. So they're pretty adaptable. But if they had a choice, I would say they would prefer a wetland.
So, you were kind of mentioning how like the center of Australia is vast dry deserts, and then like the coastline is like the
Yeah.
tropic area and stuff, and that's where most people live. So that's where a lot of the urbanization is happening, correct?
Yeah. So it's not very tropical here. As far as like you'd have to go past the Tropic of Capricorn to actually get into the tropical stuff. Like down here, it's still, like the other day, it was 40 degrees Celsius here, so it still gets really warm in summer, but we get really cold winters, and in the winter here is when it rains. But yeah, along the southern and eastern coast is where where most of the people live. But in WA, I think like 80% of the population lives in the southwest corner, and it's a huge state. Like it's almost half of the country, and they only live in this small pocket in the southwest. Well, over east, there's like a few major cities dotted along the coast, and yeah, so that's where most of the urbanization occurs. But because of there's a large industry in mining or just agriculture, so it's not just the habitat destruction for like people to live. There's also just like massive land clearing for amenities like and food.
So
So,
go ahead, Matt.
sorry, I was just saying. So because this is something I've heard about, I don't know a whole ton about, so I was curious. Is they were talking about because over in like only like the coastline seems to be like Australia, they're having trouble with like, well, how do you balance like the urbanization there, since there's only seems to be a small portion that people can live, because I guess they can't really move out too far into the outback, as while keeping the biodiversity there as well. And I guess that's something that you're kind of looking into with the tiger snake.
Well, the it's kind of a double-sided coin. Like you want to, like if you're expanding one region, then you're not destroying another region, sort of thing. So if you're just spreading one area, that that has its own costs and benefits. But as far as like the expansion goes, people in Australia really like to live in a house with a garden. So for example, it's not like there's not many, except for like Sydney and Melbourne. It's not like New York City, where it's just like massive buildings of apartments and people just live in these apartments and stuff. Like you do have a few of those, but people tend to live in houses with gardens. So it's not, when they say urban ecology, it's kind of a little bit different here, because you still have a lot of, like if you look at an aerial, there's still like a lot of green space, and we have a lot of parks and stuff like that. But of course, you'll get species that move into these areas and exploit the new environment and the new sources of food that they have. But you'll have more specialized or short range little creatures that have specific requirements that can't adapt to the land use change. So
it's interesting. So the urban centers are more like more suburban overall, in like terms of ecology and appearance. Then
yeah, like when people say like, to me, urban ecology, I think of like, Tokyo, where you just see like just skyscrapers everywhere, and you might see like a gecko on a wall, 30 floors up. Like that's, or birds that exploit certain niches in that environment. But like, at least in Perth anyway, the gardens are big. Like there's massive golf courses everywhere. I don't know why you need so many golf courses, and then just the wetlands and stuff. So there's just a lot of space for animals to still exploit, but of course, like, they get run over all the time from cars, and you'll just have animals that just can't exploit that environment. But it's I just find it quite different to the idea of a lot of people's version of urban ecology, where they're just like, you'll see foxes running through the streets of London and stuff, and it's just like, I think it's slightly different from that.
Yeah, in our last episode with Luke Harding, he was talking about blue iguana conservation in Grand Cayman Island, and he specifically mentioned trying to encourage people to make their gardens and yards more suitable for blue iguanas to actually coexist with people. So it's interesting to think that even in suburban and urban settings, and you can still have conservation efforts to protect species.
Yeah, well, tiger snakes, for example, they're quite restricted to the wetlands themselves. I would say that they're not exploiting an urban environment, because if you live right on the edge of one of these wetlands and you have a garden, you might get them in there, but they do not like disperse through gardens to get to somewhere else. Like we just published a population genetics paper, and the wetlands that are like within the city themselves, they're showing that those populations are being isolated and not getting enough well, there's a few barriers to their dispersal regardless, but the southern populations have a lot more gene flow, and there's not as much urbanization going on there. So they're definitely just restricted to these little islands that are their wetlands within the urban matrix.
So you think the urbanization is reducing gene flow because it creates barriers that doesn't allow certain populations to intermingle?
Yeah, so Perth is divided by quite a large river, and the population south of the river has more heterozygosity, which is, just the river itself is a major barrier to dispersal. And then as you go, 100 kilometers north of that river, that's pretty much the edge of their distribution. So at the edge of a distribution, you'd already have much less genetic diversity in a population. But just within like Herdsman Lake, which is an island completely surrounded by urbanization, there's just no way of new members of a population to get in there and provide the gene flow anymore. So, well, historically, when along the Swan Coastal Plain, there would have just been a whole matrix of wetlands that would have been, connected, or it wouldn't have been a large gap for them to cross, but many of them were filled in and then just like completely built up. So
is the river just too wide for them to cross?
I mean, if they would go upstream, there would definitely be places for them to cross, but then you're getting into the hills of Perth. But yeah, like basically, if you draw a straight line from Herdsman Lake to Bibra Lake, which is, our two closest study sites divided by that river, that would be a major obstacle for them to cross. like they can swim. I've seen them swimming, but like swimming across a large river is still a major task for them.
Right. Okay. So, so what have you guys proposed any like things to help increase gene flow with the ones at the north part, correct?
I mean, it's kind of, I don't really know how you would do that, because it's not like you can just open up a corridor for them to naturally do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're just going to start relocating snakes around the place, yeah, I don't really know if that would be the way to go about it. I mean, they're all right for now. I just don't know how you would provide a way for them to naturally do that.
Well, are the populations so are the populations large enough to be fine without that level of gene flow?
I mean, that's just that's just a hard question to answer. I don't know if at one point, if you keep monitoring the population for a long time, and then you at one point decide that they're becoming too inbred, this is still far down the line. They're not that inbred yet, you know. So it's just showing there's just signs that they're isolated from each other. So if you were going to, um, you know, provide gene flow by relocating snakes from other populations, I mean, maybe down the line in the future that could be an option to keep the populations viable. But I don't know, snakes generally don't do really well when you translocate them. So you'd have
Right.
to do a lot of, I mean, the habitat, they love it. They love the invasive grass from what I can tell. They don't really care about the vegetation they live in, and there's heaps of food. The problem, I guess, would be if you translocate the snake from somewhere, it would just try and go back, and it would probably just get run over. So that was another idea that a collaborator had, was that you might just have snakes at Herdsman Lake, for example. All the ones that tried to disperse, they all died. So you just have the ones left that are very sedentary, that don't move around too much anymore. But yeah, I don't know if that's true, but I thought that was just an interesting idea, that all the ones that try to leave over the years, they've probably died, and now you've selected them to just be quite sedentary.
Huh. That's interesting.
I don't know if you could test for that, but it's an interesting idea anyway.
Yeah, that is interesting. So the ones that are on that island, how did they get there? Do you know?
Yeah, so that's something we kind of discussed in the genetics paper as well. I'm just a co-author on this, by the way. This was Damien's and Brenton's main spearheaded that paper. But the main idea was that the story goes that I don't remember when, I think in the 30s or something, there was a snake showman who had a whole bunch of tiger snakes and whatever, and he would just do like live shows holding them and stuff. And I think his wife got bitten and died, so he brought them to the island and damned them there to die. That's the story anyway. But when you look at the genetics from along the like our study sites, which is probably like 100 kilometers across the coastline, and when you look at the population on the island, their genetic makeup is really similar to the ones that they're closest to on the mainland. So it could be that they dispersed there by themselves at one point when the sea level was lower. And then, you know, maybe the showman in the 30s just added to that population. So it's still a bit up in the air about how exactly they got there. The only way to really know for sure is by sampling. There's a population on another island close by, and just seeing if they're most closely related to that island. But unfortunately, that island called Garden Island is on is a military base. So
Mm.
There's a lot of hoops to jump through to get onto that island just to go catch some snakes. Damien's reached out to the ranger there to see if he ever, gets a roadkill one, just to take a tissue sample and slowly build it up from there. But man, it would be we know someone that got on there for their PhD, and yeah, it's a lot of work to just to go there for a day to go catch some snakes. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, going to catch snakes isn't worth getting shot at. So,
yeah,
so you mentioned that they seem to enjoy the invasive grass species down around Perth.
yeah.
So I'm guessing there's a lot of invasive foliage down there. So does that have any sort of impact on their ecology?
Well, yeah. So that was the main goal of my master's, was just to see if or how the invasive grass impacts their ecology. So it's called kikuyu grass, which is a lawn grass, which might even be the grass that you have in your lawn in the States as well. It's also really good to feed livestock. So that's the main reason it got introduced, was, you just plant it, and livestock love to graze on it. But when livestock aren't grazing it, or you aren't mowing it, it just grows into this like dense matrix of stems. It's like a massive pillow, really. It's really like you can walk on top of it. So the idea is that the snakes, we usually see them basking on top of it, and when they get scared, they just swim down into the grass. So it's like it's a really perfect snake home for them, because they don't really have to go far to thermoregulate. They can just sit on top and then just bury back down if they get scared. And because it grows right along the water's edge, they just have their preferred source of food right there. Frogs use it as well. And so then I also wanted to look at whether the thermal properties of the vegetation itself are different to the native grass. So basically, frogs use kikuyu grass and native vegetation pretty much just as much. Prey availability was almost the exact same. The predation rate for juveniles living in that grass or in native vegetation was also, there was a negligible difference there. The only real, and even the thermal properties of the vegetation are very similar. So if the clump of vegetation, of native vegetation, is similar in size to the wad of kikuyu grass, it's basically the same thermal properties in there as well. What I found through radio tracking them, that the main difference between the ecologies of tiger snakes in native vegetation or invasive grass is that they move less in kikuyu grass. And I think that's because they don't have to move horizontally to find appropriate microhabitats to bask. They can just bask on top of where they sleep, and then when they get too hot, they just bury down, instead of moving across the landscape to find a patch of sun to sit in to bask, and then move back to a cooler clump of vegetation. They can just move up and down in the kikuyu grass, and that's what I think is happening with that.
So
But besides that, they don't care about the vegetation they live in. It's all pretty similar. So in terms of urbanization, and as the environment continues to be altered and people keep introducing invasive vegetation, it's actually not a bad outcome for tiger snakes per se. They don't mind it too much.
the wetlands that they live in, is it brackish water or is it fresh water?
It's freshwater. They're well, the wetlands that we looked at, because just to keep it consistent, we only looked at enclosed wetlands. So they do live in like the river I described. If there's enough fringing vegetation, they can live in there, and that is brackish. But And there are frogs that can tolerate, a certain level of brackish water. So as long as the frogs are there, then they'll be fine. Yeah, so basically, as long as there's enough fringing vegetation and frogs live in it, then there's a good chance that there will be tiger snakes at that wetland. So yeah, that's the main idea of the Perth tiger snake habitat preferences.
They seem to be pretty resilient to most like different types of environments and stuff, as long as they have like the prey and the ability to thermoregulate and all that. They seem to be able to tolerate a wide variety of different things. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah. So yeah, they're pretty resilient, and so what Damien's research is looking at, is basically using them as a bioindicator of wetland health. So he looked at a whole bunch of biomarkers, basically, of their health, and looked at the pollution of the wetlands, and yeah, and now we're working. I think the paper's has been submitted, but basically looking at all of the factors that he's looked at over 4 years, what actually predicts the health of a tiger snake in a certain wetland. And yeah, basically it's just I don't know if I should be saying this because it's not published yet, but
Yeah, if you don't feel comfortable with it, feel free to.
yeah, no, it's all good, because basically, especially the enclosed wetlands like Herdsman Lake are full of pollutants, and the tiger snakes bioaccumulate a lot of the heavy metals in those lakes. And basically, one of the only ways to predict how the health of a tiger snake is how polluted, or how much of these heavy metals they've bioaccumulated. And so the snakes at Herdsman Lake, which is the most polluted wetland, are in a far worse body condition than a lot of the other populations that aren't as polluted.
So, how would you? Is there so? Are there certain pollutants that are worse for tiger snakes? Since I guess it's mainly the heavy metals that are affecting them. Are there certain pollutants that are worse than others, or?
I mean, we haven't teased out, if a high amount of lead in a tiger snake is worse than a high amount of uranium, because there's literally there's like the paper on that. I think there's like 16 heavy metals that they are bioaccumulating. So if you wanted to figure out which particular metal is bad for them, you'd basically have to keep a whole bunch in captivity and just spoon feed them heavy metals to see which one. But they're probably all not great for them, and also maybe a little bit of molybdenum isn't so bad, but then when you have all of them together and they're only slightly above, an average concentration, that's just a cumulative effect. But it was pretty interesting to see that Herdsman Lake has uranium levels above government guidelines. That's just like a major urban park where everyone goes to walk their dogs and stuff like that. So
what's causing the most of the pollution there? Do you know? Is there a lot of agriculture runoff there?
Well, it used to be, they used to run sheep there, so that's why they put the kikuyu grass. It was just meant to be sheep pasture, but I don't know why they removed the sheep in the end. But it's just surrounded by an industrial area, and so all the runoff goes straight into the wetland, and also a few major roads around it, so you never know if there's a spill or anything. And then when it rains, it all just ends up in the wetland, and because it's an enclosed wetland, there's no river going out to the ocean. It just stays in there, so it just continues to accumulate more and more. So and there's no real way to clean it up either. Like if you wanted to clean it up, you'd basically just have to destroy the whole wetland and start over. So that's not really much use either. So it's basically just like learn from it. Don't let it happen somewhere else, kind of thing. So, and that's the other thing with the kikuyu grass as well. It's like it's there now. If you wanted to rehabilitate the whole or restore the whole lake, you'd have to bulldoze or burn all the grass off and then start over. So that's not really, beneficial to the animals that live there. All the animals that were there that have been extirpated. So like some of the birds that would have lived there that don't live on the Swan Coastal Plain anymore, they're just all restricted to the hills now. That's a long way for them to fly just to find this wetland that you've restored. So then it might not even be that useful to restoring biodiversity to rehabilitate the wetland. So you're better off just leaving it, basically.
Interesting.
So you mentioned that their diet is mostly made of frogs. So what are some other prey items that they might predate on other than frogs?
Yeah, so I think they mainly just eat frogs because frogs are really easy.
Fair enough.
I think especially because when they just live in the vegetation amongst them, or maybe they'll eat little metamorphs in the water. But because they just live in the grass, I think they just cruise around and they find a sleeping frog and they just gobble it up. I don't even think they wait for it to die. I think they just eat it alive. And then, but while they're cruising around, we found birds, like baby birds, and we found one baby Bandicoot, which is, Crash Bandicoot, the game?
Yeah.
So it's like a small little furry marsupial, and yeah, they're pretty vicious actually. But we found a little baby one in a tiger snake stomach, and then recently, last field season, we caught a snake that Damien was going to dissect to look at the parasites inside them. And when he was dissecting it, he actually found a baby turtle, and that's the first record of an Australian snake successfully predating on a turtle, which is interesting. So we found a few of they're opportunistic, but they mainly just eat frogs, I think, because it's just the easiest and most available food source. Of course, I've seen ducks nesting in the kikuyu grass as well. So when those babies hatch and there's a tiger snake nearby, it would definitely make the most of that as well. But I think they're not too fussy. They just pick whatever's right in front of them. And on the islands, they eat skinks as well, but mainly just the bird chicks when it's nesting season on those islands.
So I don't know if you know this, but when it ate the turtle, was it small enough to where it could swallow it whole with the shell and everything, or did it eat?
Yeah. It was a tiny turtle. It's like, the shell wouldn't be much bigger than the size of a coin.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so like freshly hatched turtle. We don't know if it actually caught it in the water or if it may have found it on land or whatever. But yeah, it was a tiny little turtle. There's a few records of snakes in Australia anyway trying to eat turtles, but they just couldn't get around the shell. So yeah, that's why it was a pretty interesting observation to actually find one. And we always feel for food in the stomach, and if there's something in there, we try to palpate it out, but we didn't even feel the little turtle in there.
So I've heard cottonmouth they'll like bend over tall grass to kind of flag areas that are better hunting areas than others. Do you see tiger snakes doing anything similar to that with like the tall invasive grass that you get?
Man, I followed tiger snakes around for about 2 months, and they do nothing. Like I knew they did very little. Like I knew that they, like, my Damien warned me before I was going to radio track them. He was like, "Are you sure you want to radio track them? Because they don't do much." And I was like, yeah, radio tracking is so much fun. Yeah, they do nothing. The most interesting observation I made of a tiger snake was on like one of the last days of tracking. I finally found one eating a frog. Most of the time, they just sit there basking, and sometimes you'll see them moving around, or like, you come back, a few days later and it's moved. But this is another reason why I think that they just live amongst their food, and they can just, within their shelter site, they can just find frogs, because they don't really need to move much to hunt. Like, they can just be in their shelter site, wake up, cruise around a little bit, find a frog, and then just go and bask and digest. So yeah, I was a bit bored at the end, radio tracking. Just, I spent more time sitting in the car waiting for the next tracking interval than actually walking around sometimes. But I had a few outliers that just decided to go walkabout. One swam across the entire lake, and he went out of range, and so I had to walk around the whole lake and across this like narrow channel until I got a signal. And even then he was just like somewhere on a floating mat of vegetation, and I had to borrow a friend's kayak to like go out there and figure out which clump of vegetation he was on. And I found the clump of vegetation, and I thought, oh, there's no way that if I climb up there that I'm actually going to catch him. So I got out of the kayak into this water that I know is polluted with uranium and all the sorts of stuff. And I climbed onto this clump of vegetation, and I just saw him basking there in a little disc, and I just grabbed him. And yeah, that was one of my proudest moments of my master's, I think, to actually retrieve him, because of the temperature data loggers, I had to catch them all again to download the data. So yeah, that was a good one to get back.
Do you go ahead, Nate?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know this isn't like your particular expertise, but do you know if there's any like research being done with their venom as far as like medical research and stuff?
Yeah, so the main guy in Australia that does all the venom stuff is Brian Fry at the University of Queensland, and he has a whole team of people that do a whole bunch of venom research. I wouldn't know what the latest thing with tiger snakes venom is, and also because tiger snakes are so wide ranging, their venom in Perth would be a different cocktail than what they use on the East Coast. There would be some similarities, but it would be still, there'd be some differences. And I know that there was a relatively recent paper from that lab that described the shift in the venom cocktail of brown snakes when they're born to when they're adults, because basically all Australian snakes, when they're born, they're like tiny little, or at least elapids anyway, they're pretty small, and pretty much all of them feed on lizards when they're born, and then as they grow larger and can eat mammals, their venom shifts to target that specific prey. So I'm sure there's also a lot of and tiger snakes as a whole are also super variable. At one point, there are several species, and a lot of people say the jury's still out on whether they're just one really morphologically diverse species. So I know there'll be some differences in their venom.
So how I first came across you was your wildlife photography. So you want to go into that at all, or?
Yeah, for sure. What do you want to know about?
Any like, what's been your general experience like out there, down there, herping and just finding stuff to photograph and stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry for it being kind of a vague question, but
no, that's all good. I've watched a few YouTube videos of guys herping in the States, and I'll see videos of guys that find like 50 snakes in a day, and that just doesn't happen here. I don't know anyone that's been out herping here for like a night and found like 50 snakes. it's pretty hard in Australia unless you just get like a massive. I know a friend of mine. He was somewhere in central Queensland during a massive flooding event, and he might have gotten 50 snakes that night. I don't know if he even got that many, but because because of the way the sand is, it just becomes a sludge and just seals up the cracks, and because it's so dry and barren there, all the snakes live in the soil cracks. So once they fill up, the snakes have nowhere else to go but the road. And so, unless you get an event like that where they have nowhere else to be, it's very hard to find a lot of animals. I think one of my best nights where I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. I think that was like 10 different snakes. So it's pretty hard to, people think, oh, Australia, the land of snakes, I'm going to see snakes everywhere. But I reckon most Australians have barely even, they might have most Australians probably even just glimpsed a snake or probably haven't even seen one. I'll walk around Herdsman Lake and, we've caught 25 tiger snakes in a day there because that's just like that's like, I don't know, anywhere else where there's a population of tiger snakes or elapids in general that dense. And people will walk up to me and like, oh, there are tiger snakes here. And it's like, and they're just walking their dog off the leash or whatever. But yeah, I think the herping, the snakes here are very cryptic, and especially because it gets hot really quick. So there's only, at least in spring and summer when they're out, by 10 o'clock in the morning, it's pretty much done for the day. And it's like 40 degrees maybe, and people are, oh, there'll be snakes out. No, they're all gone. They're all hiding by then. But as far as herping trips go, yeah, I've been to a few places around Australia, and I think the herping is probably the best in spring and autumn. That's probably the best two seasons to go herping and actually find large numbers of individuals, because in summer it's just too hot and everything dies off.
It's like the Burmese pythons in Florida. People think you go over there and you're just gonna see them all over the place, but you can go spend 12 hours walking around in the swamps and stuff and never see one. The best way to find them is just road cruising, driving down a dirt road that isn't traveled very often, and hoping you get lucky that one crosses the road at that time. Other than that, you could walk past 5 of them and not even know it. Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of them out there, but you're just not going to see them.
Yeah, that's my favorite method of herping is road cruising. That's how you target snakes the best, I feel. Except, if you're really looking for a specific species, if you're just going somewhere just to get bulk species, most things that you want to see, then yeah, definitely road cruising on a warm night. That's the best. But there's also a lot of cool diurnal stuff that you won't get. Like a lot of the dragons, they're really amazing in Australia, and yeah, they can be quite easy to see, but getting a photo of them can be a different story, because a lot of the larger ones anyway, they just bolt as soon as they see you. But since during my master's and just a bit off and on, but now more so that I've sort of finished, I've gone back into environmental consulting, so I get to do some trapping and stuff. So I get to see a lot of the ones that are hard to get.
How do you with herping, like, monitor lizards over there? Is that pretty difficult? Are they pretty common, or how does that? Like?
Yeah, so the big ones are relatively easy to see. You'll just be driving down the road, and they'll just be standing in the middle of the road or just off the side of the road. But all the smaller ones, beside which are probably my favorite, the smaller ones, I really like them. You got some really nice colors on them, and they're just also a bit hard to find. They can be really tricky to get. Like one of them is called Brevicauda. It's one of the smallest monitors. I think there's only one species that's smaller than them in northern Australia, and they just live in sand burrows under spinifex clumps. So unless you're trapping, they're super hard to get. I was doing a survey, and I was digging up what I thought was a scorpion hole, and I found one at the bottom of that. But besides doing that, they're very hard to get. And a lot of the other ones, they're either just living behind bark or in rock cracks. So you need to put unless you just hit the right patch, you can put a lot of hours in, and maybe even then only get a glimpse of one scooting up the tree. And yeah. And then even then, they're like, if you do find one and catch one, they're very hard to photograph. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why is that? Do they just scare you off like immediately, or?
Yeah, they're especially the smaller tree monitors and stuff. They're just really nervous little things. So yeah, they're pretty hard to photograph and get something where they don't look dead or super scared. So the larger ones, like parentes, if you get a really large parente or a yellow spotted monitor, especially the yellow spotteds, you could just walk right up to them, and they'll defend themselves. So you probably don't even need to catch them or anything. You can just get real close, and it'll hiss at you and may even swipe at you with its tail, and you can get really cool shots of it like that. And parentes as well. They're especially a big one. They'll generally not really consider you that much of a threat. The smaller ones will, of course, but if you got a large male, he'll probably just sit there if you approach him slowly. So
Yeah, Parenti's probably my ultimate bucket list lizard to herp up. So that's good news.
there was one just hanging out along the path at one of the mine camps I was at recently. He just cruising around eating scraps that people leave behind.
That's gotta be so cool. Monitor lizards are my all-time favorite lizards. So that's gotta be so cool to just see them like just hanging out like, I don't know, like a squirrel over here or something.
Like raccoons.
In Perth, it's pretty hard. You do get them. You do get monitors occasionally. I've seen a few little tree monitors, but if you go anywhere dry, any sandy or rocky habitat, a bit further north or east, you'll just see them like along the road all the time. Especially sand monitors, they'll just be along the road, and you actually see heaps of roadkill because they just stand in the middle of the road and look around, or just sit there basking, and people just don't see them and run them over. But
have you set up like a drift fence trap like in the desert or something like that?
Yeah. So that's one of the main things one of my favorite things I do as a consultant is the pitfall trapping, and we get a few monitors doing that. I haven't done any trapping in the sandy stuff, but in the Pilbara we do quite a bit of it, and yeah,
that's pretty cool. So I did want to like switch gears on a different question as far as topics go. So Nate, did you have any more like questions as far as this topic goes?
Not at the moment.
Cool. Okay, so I did want to ask. So we talked to someone else about this too, but I thought since you're a master's student, it'd be a good question to ask you. What would you tell the people that are wanting to go get their master's degree, like especially in herpetology, like how they should go about doing it, and just like your experience and stuff like that?
Well, especially if you want to do research. Like you can do a coursework masters, and you know that you can just apply to any uni that has the courses you want to do, and you just do the coursework, and you get a master's, right? So, but if you want to do a research project, I think the main thing is you need to be genuinely interested in what you're doing, and probably do it in your free time as well. Like I'll go herping in my free time. I'll go photograph snakes. You know, that's one of my main hobbies already, right? And so then if you do that, you're already gaining experience in your free time. And you know, if you're an undergrad, it sounds shit, but you have to volunteer. Like that's the only way you're going to get on paper experience for doing stuff. Like I just, you know, and it might just be cleaning equipment for PhD students. Like as long as you know, as long as you get in there and you're helping out with other research projects, and you'll get um, PhD students that'll be like, oh yeah, this person is genuinely interested, and they might then recommend you to other people, and then you slowly build up your way to do cooler stuff. So I started out volunteering by just cleaning gecko enclosures for one of my, well, I didn't know him at the time, but he actually became a good friend of mine. So he had like 300 or more geckos in one room, and I would be one of the people that would help him with the husbandry of that, feeding them and cleaning their enclosures and stuff. And you know, then he invited me to do a bit of field work around the place, and then you know, he knows this guy knows what he's doing. He recommended me to do some other stuff, and that slowly, you know, led into me going on actual trips to go survey for leaf-tailed geckos and catch them and do and like collect like morphometrics on them and stuff. And then that actually led into me eventually working as a research assistant at that university, doing basically the same stuff I was already doing as a volunteer, except I was getting paid now. I was going, you know, getting paid to go help my friend um, do his radio tracking of knobtail geckos, and then taking care of a PhD student's geckos in the lab. And so, you know, just you just have to. And it was hard for me to get my foot in the door. I was like hounding some of my lecturers, like, I want to volunteer because that's the only way you get experience. And then eventually I got started doing some snake catching stuff. So I was already herping in my free time and doing some, you know, some of this RA work. And then I did snake relocations, which, you know, it's at the time I was naive about snake relocations, but it's a good way to get your snake handling experience up, at least, you know, legally on paper that you're doing it. And then I started working in environmental consulting because the RA stuff, I just wasn't getting enough work. You know, I was just like a few hours here and there taking care of geckos and the occasional little field trip. So then I started working, doing consulting, and it was mainly clearance work. So I was just catching animals that were, you know, their habitat was being destroyed, and you just, whatever animals you see, you catch them and you relocate them to somewhere else or whatever. So there's a lot of animal handling experience with that. And then eventually, you know, after doing many trips in my free time and doing that, I reached out to a supervisor and told them my qualifications and that I want to do research on at first I was actually on geckos with the same uni at in Townsville, and I did some snake stuff as well. Like I was just using invasive geckos and the scent of native snakes to see if the invasive geckos could tell the difference between some of the species just based on their scent. And they actually could tell the difference between certain species, so that was cool.
Really cool.
And
Yeah.
then you know, I did some more work, and then eventually I reached out to a supervisor in Perth, and Yeah, I just got lucky, I guess, because my other supervisor here said she would have never given me a project where I'm just catching a whole bunch of super venomous snakes without even meeting me, because I just reached out in an email, and it only took about 2 emails before my supervisor was like, "Yeah, we've got something for you." Um, so I mean, I got lucky in that regard because I didn't have to come here to, you know, anyone online can just be like, "Yeah, I can catch snakes," and then you actually
Right.
put in that environment, and there could be an incident. But we've caught like well over 500 snakes, and we've done it without any incidents. So
Wow.
so yeah, basically have a genuine interest, get out there and do it in your free time, and then just keep hounding supervisors until one of them knows that you're for real and you really want to take it seriously. Because I know students that, maybe they did their undergrad and then they were done, and none of the jobs that they thought they could get were available, or all the jobs that were available they weren't interested in. So they just decided, oh, you know what, I'm going to do a PhD because I get a scholarship on a PhD. So you get some money. It's not heaps, but it's enough to live. So, and then they just, I don't know, they're just not genuinely interested in their project, and it's reflected in the quality of work that they do. I don't want to call anyone out or anything, but that's just an observation that I've made. That, like, and people ask me as well, because they're like, oh my god, tiger snakes, like that's so awesome, like I want to do that as well. And or even in consulting, I'll work with people that are really, they love their job and they love animals and stuff, but in their free time they're not like me. They don't go out and go do it in their free time as well, which I find, I mean, most of the people that I got along really well in that industry, they all do the same thing, like whether it's birds or frogs or whatever. If you have a thing that you're interested in, you go out and do it in your free time. I click with those people a lot better than people that just do it because it's just a job.
Yeah, I have I won't like name names or anything, but I work at two places. One's more research oriented, the other one's more casual. And the one place, the people there just don't have a passion for what they do. I mean, they like what they do, but they don't like. It's like once the job's over, that's it, and then they're fine, and then they don't really care about it or anything like that. Whereas the other people are just insanely passionate about what they do, and that's what they're constantly doing, even on their days off and stuff like that. And um, it's a lot more fun to be around the people that are a lot more like passionate about what they do, even if it's not necessarily the exact same thing that you're passionate in and stuff. But it's a lot more fun. So that's neat. Um, what would you recommend between someone like deciding like coming out of their undergraduate whether to go get their master's degree or to and then PhD, or if they should go straight into their PhD, or how, what would you recommend with that?
Well, I think it really depends on, well, one, how old they are, because I know that when I went to uni when I was 19, I was a terrible student. Like I'm lucky that my first supervisor, Lynn Schwarzkopf, who's like a really good herpetologist, she's an amazing supervisor as well. My whole undergrad, I had really like not fantastic grades, and then I did her herpetology subject, and I got like top marks in that. And she said, if you didn't get a high distinction in my subject, I would not have given you a project. So, but that's also because I was genuinely interested in the herpetology, right? Like a lot of the other subjects that I did, there was a few interesting ones, but none that really like was like, this is why I came to uni. Um, so it depends how old you are, I think, because as you get older, you take things more seriously. And then also, what life experience do you have? You don't need to be old to have, to have done things in your life. If you just finish uni, you go straight, or you finish high school, go straight into undergrad, and at 21, 22, you're like, I'm going to do a PhD. I mean, just go live your life a little bit first, you know, like there's no rush for you to get a PhD. Like you can always come back to uni, right? Like, and especially like, if you've done all that, you're just broke. Like you know, you can't really enjoy life as much either. Like you definitely can, but it's I would say finish high school, go figure out what you actually enjoy doing in your life. Like it was easy for me because I already, from a young age, I already knew what I wanted to do, but I've grown to learn that I'm the outlier with that. Like heaps of people, they, you know, they don't actually know what they want to do with their life. And I feel like that's the problem nowadays, at least in Australia, with the zoology, ecology, conservation biology, you know, all of that, all of those topics in uni. I feel like people, they don't really know what they want to do. They're like, oh, I think animals are cute. I'm going to study something relating to animals. They get a degree, and then they don't know what job they want. They don't know how to navigate that industry. They're not really that, they find out they're not really that genuinely interested in any of it. So they have this degree that they then don't really know what to do with. So finish high school, figure out what you actually want to do, or just get some life experience, you know, go traveling, or, you know, do something with your life other than go to school. Then go to uni and, you know, figure out what that passion is, and just do that in your free time. Start volunteering in the subjects that you are interested in. And then when you're done with undergrad, if you find a project or a supervisor that's willing to take you, and that supervisor is really good at what they do and you're interested in their research, then take that opportunity. Otherwise, just work a little bit and take more time to figure out what you're doing. It's not, there's no rush to to do university, I feel, because it's not going anywhere. You can always come back if you figure out what you're really passionate about. And yeah, I don't know what it's like in the US, but you can always get a job doing something that you might not directly be interested in, as long as you have that passion outside of it, and you can, you know, work on your skills outside of it. Then that might be the best option for you if you can't, you know, find exactly that niche that really works for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the that was one thing that a lot of people found annoying, but I thought was kind of good. The university that we went to, and I don't know if all universities are like this, but the one that I went to, at least, the Gen Bio, the freshman biology class, because you do get those people that that you know think biology is just, you know, how many facts they know from a documentary that they watched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so and so they made that first semester biology class like super hard so that it weeds out most of those people. And I knew a few people that I was thinking, I was like, these people are not gonna, they're not like biology minded at all. They like the documentary biology. And but yeah, that was one thing that I thought was good, is they made it like really hard and more technical based, so that way it kind of weeded out all those people pretty quickly. So
Yeah, that's one of the things that that I mean, honestly, if that would have happened, I mean, it's a bit hypocritical of me, because, as I said, I wasn't a very good student per se
yeah,
in undergrad, but at least now that I've, you know, I've marked some assignments and exams and things like that, and it's like, you like, a lot of these people just need to fail, you know,
yeah,
like a lot of these, like, they're just, you know, with undergrads, they're just holding their hand and getting them through. And I think, you know, I think a few more just need to fail a subject, or, you know, just, they need to learn that they can't just, that they actually have to do stuff. Because if you're just getting 40% in a subject, and that's the cutoff to pass, then, I mean, maybe that's not the direction that you need to be taking. But
right,
I mean, that's saying that again, I was a shit student, but when I found the area that I was passionate about, my supervisor saw that, and she also saw that the research, you know, I'm not good at assignments. I'm not good at exams. I don't like studying for them. if you give me a research project that I have to manage, I have to go do the field work for it, I have to do the reading on it, and then write about that. That's more of my area. Just regurgitating information that's been taught in a subject, that wasn't really my thing. But as soon as I found a research project, I knew that that's what I was, that was how I wanted to learn, and it reflected in my grades at the end as well.
Yeah. Matt, you have any other questions?
No, I think that's a good place to stop. Unless you had any questions.
No. Want to say anything in closing, or?
I don't know.
Sorry if I put pressure on you. Sorry about that.
No. I mean, I just think if anyone is back on the subject of getting into the research stuff, it's not for everyone, and maybe people just need to get a taste of it and figure out if it's not. So, I know now that after doing a two-year master's, I don't want to jump straight into a PhD. That's just a whole another level of chapter of my life that I don't really want to dedicate to anything yet. So yeah, I think just take your time with your career as well. Like, that doesn't need to happen before you're 30.
That's good advice. I think a lot of people. Well, I know me personally. Like, I always try and I have to get everything done as fast as possible so I can, But I think that's good advice.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Appreciate it.